I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. My name doesn't matter, but what does matter is that I'm a 32-year-old woman who's been married for almost 8 years. On paper, my life looks stable. A husband who works long hours as an IT manager, a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, and a golden retriever who's basically our child. People see the Christmas cards, the Instagram posts, and they assume everything is fine. But it hasn't been fine for a long time. My husband Mark is a good man. I want to make that clear from the beginning. He's not abusive, not cruel, not unfaithful, at least not in the physical sense. But somewhere along the way, our marriage became more like a business partnership than a relationship. We split bills, we argue over chores, we make decisions about repairs and vacations. The intimacy, the closeness, the spark, it's been fading for years. Some nights when he stays late at the office, I don't even notice anymore. I just pour myself a glass of wine, put on Netflix, and scroll on my phone till I fall asleep. And that's where my neighbor comes in. His name is Daniel. He's 35, divorced, and has lived next door for about 6 years. The first time we met was when Mark and I had just moved into the neighborhood. He came over with a toolbox to help us install our mailbox because we were struggling with it. I remember laughing nervously when he told Mark, "Don't worry, man, I've been through this before. You just need someone stubborn enough to make it work." Daniel has always been that guy, the one who mows his lawn perfectly, helps elderly neighbors shovel their driveways, brings in people's trash bins if they forget. He's the unofficial good neighbor of our street. Everyone likes him, even the kids. But what I didn't realize until much later is that he's always had a soft spot for me. Over the years, we became friends. Not the "hey, how's it going" kind of friends, but actual friends. We'd talk across the fence in the summer when I was watering the flowers. Sometimes when Mark was working late, Daniel would invite me to join him on his back porch for a beer or iced tea. It always felt innocent. He'd ask about my job. I work remotely for a small marketing firm, and I'd listen to him talk about his work in construction management. I guess I didn't notice how natural it felt, how easy it was to talk to him compared to the strained small talk I had with my own husband. One night about 2 months ago, Mark was on a business trip in Chicago. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the air feels heavy but calm, and you don't really know what to do with yourself. Daniel texted me, "Just a casual you around? I've got a new bottle of bourbon, thought you might want to try it." I almost said no. I knew it wasn't the best idea. But I also didn't want to spend another lonely night binging shows alone. So I went over. We sat on his porch, sipping bourbon that was smoother than anything I'd ever had before, talking about random things, movies, the neighborhood gossip, even my dog, who adores him. At one point, I laughed so hard at one of his dumb jokes that I spilled some bourbon on my jeans. He grabbed a towel, and when his hand brushed against mine, I froze. It was such a small thing, but I remember my heart racing. I pulled back quickly, pretending it was nothing. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, noticed. Desired. Daniel didn't push. He never has. But that night, when I stood up to leave, he looked at me differently. I can't explain it exactly, but it was like all the years of friendly smiles and casual conversations had been building towards something else, something heavier, more dangerous. The next day, I told myself I was imagining it. That bourbon made me overthink, that I was lonely, that I was projecting emotions onto someone who was just being kind. But then little things started happening. He'd linger when we talked. He'd compliment me, not in a flirty way, but in ways Mark never did anymore. "You look really nice today," or "That color suits you." He'd notice when I got a haircut, or when I was wearing new shoes. And then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Mark and I had a fight, one of those exhausting circular arguments about money and how we barely spend time together. I ended up storming out onto the porch just to cool off, and Daniel, as if on cue, appeared outside. He didn't even ask questions. He just handed me a beer and sat with me in silence until I finally vented. I told him everything, how invisible I felt in my marriage, how tired I was of always trying, how lonely it all felt. He listened. Really listened. And when I finished, he said something I wasn't prepared for. I've cared about you for a long time, longer than I probably should have. I didn't want to say anything, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I felt the air leave my lungs. I laughed at first, nervous, shaking my head like he was joking. But he wasn't. His face was serious. His eyes locked on mine. That was the moment I realized my safe little friendship with Daniel wasn't so safe anymore. And I don't know what to do with that. When Daniel said those words, I swear the world tilted. I felt like the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore. I've cared about you for a long time. It was the kind of confession you expect in a movie, not on your neighbor's porch at 11 p.m. in the middle of suburban Ohio. I remember staring at him, clutching the beer bottle in my hand so tightly that my knuckles went white. My first instinct was to laugh it off, pretend I'd misheard him, or maybe even scold him for crossing a line. But instead, I froze. And that silence, it said more than I wanted it to. Daniel, I finally whispered. You can't say that. I know, he said quickly, his voice low but steady. I know it's wrong. You're married. Believe me, I've told myself 100 times to keep my mouth shut. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. His words hit me harder than I expected. I should have gotten angry. I should have walked away. But instead I sat there, staring into his eyes, realizing for the first time just how much I'd leaned on him these past years. How many times I'd turned to him when I felt invisible at home. How many laughs, late-night talks, and moments had been quietly weaving something between us. I told myself, it was innocent, harmless. But was it? Really? I cleared my throat, trying to summon some version of authority. Daniel, I love Mark. He's my husband. We can't. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded slowly, almost sadly. I know. I'm not asking you to leave him. I'm not even asking you for anything. I just needed you to know the truth. Because watching you live next door, watching him not see you the way you deserve, it's been killing me. My chest ached at those words. Because as wrong as this conversation was, a part of me wanted to hear it. A part of me needed to hear it. That night, I left quickly. I muttered something about needing sleep, about it being late, and I walked back into my house with my heart pounding in my ears. Mark was asleep upstairs, his laptop still open on the nightstand. He barely stirred when I slipped into bed. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, Daniel's voice replayed in my head. The days after his confession were unbearable. Every time I saw him, bringing in his trash bins, walking his dog, mowing the lawn, it felt like a secret was hanging in the air between us. I tried to act normal, waving politely, making small talk if we crossed paths. But there was a shift. I felt it. He felt it. And I hated how much I thought about him. One afternoon, about a week later, Mark came home early. I was in the kitchen making dinner when he walked in, loosening his tie, looking tired but pleasant. We made small talk about his day, about my latest project, about the bills. It felt mechanical, like two coworkers going over their agendas. Then, mid-conversation, I caught myself thinking, if this were Daniel, he'd be asking about my favorite book. He'd notice the playlist I had running. He'd make me laugh instead of just nodding absently. And that thought terrified me. I told myself I had to pull back. I had to create distance. Daniel may have confessed, but I didn't have to entertain it. I was married. I had made vows. I wasn't going to be that woman. But life has a cruel sense of timing. One Saturday morning, Mark was out golfing with coworkers and I was in the backyard, pulling weeds from the flower bed. Daniel was fixing something on his fence. At first, we just exchanged polite nods. I thought maybe we could go back to normal. But then he walked over, holding a pair of pliers, wiping sweat from his forehead. Hey, you okay? He asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the dirt on my gloves, at the weeds piled beside me, feeling that lump in my throat. And before I could stop myself, I said the words that had been eating at me since his confession. Why did you have to tell me? He looked caught off guard but not regretful. Because it's the truth. And you deserve the truth, even if it complicates things. None. It's all idea. I shook my head, standing up, brushing dirt off my jeans. You don't understand. You've put me in an impossible position. I can't stop thinking about it, about you. The moment the words left my mouth, I wanted to claw them back. I hadn't meant to admit that, but it was too late. Daniel's expression softened, and for the first time since his confession, he stepped closer. Then stop fighting it, he said gently. I could feel his presence, the heat radiating off him, the way his eyes searched mine. My body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly in his direction. But my mind screamed at me to run, to shut this down before I destroyed everything. I forced myself to take a step back. I can't. I won't. Please, just give me space. Daniel nodded slowly, though I saw the disappointment flicker across his face. If that's what you want. But the way he said it, it didn't feel final. It felt like the start of something neither of us could fully stop. That night, lying next to Mark, I realized something that scared me more than Daniel's confession itself. I didn't know if I wanted to stop. If you've ever carried a secret so heavy it changes the way you move through the world, you'll understand what those next weeks felt like for me. Every routine moment, walking the dog, folding laundry, cooking dinner, was laced with something unspoken. I'd catch myself zoning out, replaying Daniel's words in my head, replaying my own slip. I can't stop thinking about it. About you. I hated myself for admitting it. But the truth was, the thought of Daniel lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Mark, oblivious as always, didn't notice a thing. If anything, he seemed relieved that I wasn't nagging him about spending late nights at the office. He mistook my distraction for contentment. We still had our routine dinners, our grocery runs, our Netflix shows, but the distance between us was cavernous. I couldn't remember the last time he'd touched me with tenderness, the last time we'd laughed until our stomachs hurt. And then there was Daniel, close enough to see every day, far enough that I couldn't just bury what had happened. One Sunday afternoon, about 3 weeks after my "please give me space" plea, I heard a knock on the door. Mark was out at the gym, and I assumed it was a package delivery. But when I opened it, Daniel was standing there, holding a small Tupperware container. "Hey," he said, awkwardly shifting his weight. "I made too much chili. Thought you and Mark might like some." Ned quaid. It was such a normal, neighborly gesture that for a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here was this man who had confessed his feelings for me, who I couldn't stop thinking about, standing on my porch holding chili like nothing had ever happened. "Thanks," I said, my voice a little tighter than I wanted it to be. We stood there for a moment, the air heavy between us. Finally, Daniel sighed. "Look, I know you said you needed space, and I'm trying, I really am, but I don't want things to be weird. You've been my friend for years, I don't want to lose that." Something in his tone, earnest, almost pleading, hit me in the chest. I nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Yeah. Me neither." "Yeah. Did." For the next half hour we stood in the doorway, talking about safe topics, the neighborhood kids, the rising cost of groceries, his latest home repair project. It was easy, familiar, so much so that when Mark's car pulled into the driveway, I panicked. Daniel must have read the look on my face because he gave me a quick nod and left before Mark even made it to the porch. "Who was that?" Mark asked casually, carrying his gym bag inside. "Daniel," I replied too quickly. "He made chili." Mark shrugged, kissed my cheek distractedly, and walked straight to the shower. That was it. No suspicion, no questions. Just business as usual. And somehow, that indifference felt worse than jealousy would have. A week later, I made the mistake of sitting on my porch after dinner with a glass of wine. The summer air was warm, the cicadas buzzing, the kind of night where the silence almost invites trouble. Sure enough, Daniel appeared in his yard carrying a folding chair. "Mind if I join you?" he asked cautiously. I should have said no. I knew I should have said no. But instead I gestured to the empty space beside me. "Sure." We sat there for an hour, sipping wine, talking about nothing and everything. The stars came out, the air cooled, and with every laugh, every shared glance, the line between neighbors and something more blurred. At one point, I admitted, "You make it too easy to forget myself." Daniel turned his head, eyes locking with mine. "Maybe you don't need to forget yourself. Maybe you need to remember who you are." The words landed so deep in me that I almost choked on my wine. Because he was right. With Mark, I'd become this muted version of myself, predictable, quiet, fading into the background. With Daniel, I felt alive. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't even touch. But when I went to bed lying next to a husband who snored softly without reaching for me, I knew I was in trouble. It came to a head 2 Fridays later. Mark was at a late client dinner, and I was home alone, restless. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, rain dripping from his jacket. "Storm knocked out my power," he said, his voice rough. "Mind if I hang here until it passes?" My stomach flipped. I should have said no. I should have told him to call the power company, wait it out. But instead, I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the storm pounding against the windows, candles casting soft shadows. It felt intimate in a way that terrified me. He asked if he could dry his jacket. I handed him a towel, and when his fingers brushed mine, the tension was unbearable. "Why are we doing this?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. He looked at me like he'd been holding something back for years. "Because neither of us is brave enough to admit what we want." The silence that followed was deafening. My chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, my heart pounding against my ribs. Every part of me screamed to lean forward, to close the distance, to feel what I'd been denying. But I didn't. Not that night. Instead, I pulled away, clutching the towel like it was a shield. "Daniel, if we cross that line, there's no going back." He nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with restraint. "I know." The storm outside eventually calmed, but the one inside me didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could keep saying no. I have always believed that the most dangerous moments in life don't come with warning sirens. They slip in quietly, disguised as something ordinary. A casual conversation. A stormy night. A neighbor dropping off leftovers. That's how it happened with Daniel. Small, ordinary moments that slowly became extraordinary, until resisting him felt less like a choice, and more like suffocating. The night of the storm should have been my wake-up call. I should have seen the danger and put distance between us. Instead, I found myself gravitating toward him even more. Not on purpose, not at first. But every time I caught his eye across the lawn, every time I heard his laugh from his porch, it felt like a magnet pulling at me. Mark didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. Our marriage had become a shell of itself. He worked, he came home, we ate dinner in silence, and he spent his evenings on his laptop. Sometimes I'd catch him watching YouTube videos about productivity or finance, and I wanted to scream. "I'm right here. Do you even see me anymore?" But he didn't. And Daniel did. The breaking point came one Saturday in late August. Mark had left early for a weekend golf trip with his colleague. I had the house to myself, which normally meant cleaning, errands, maybe some wine and a rom-com in the evening. But that day, I found myself restless, pacing from room to room. Around noon, I stepped outside with the intention of walking the dog. Daniel was washing his car in the driveway, his shirt damp from the hose, clinging to his chest in a way that made me look twice before I caught myself. He noticed me immediately, raising a hand with that easy smile that always disarmed me. "Hey, you want to grab lunch? There's that new diner on Main I've been meaning to try." I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But the words that came out were, "Sure. Let me grab my keys." The diner was nothing special. Rude vinyl booths, the smell of fried food, a waitress who kept calling us honorable. But sitting across from Daniel, laughing over greasy burgers and milkshakes, I felt more like myself than I had in years. He asked me questions Mark never would have thought to ask, about the books I was reading, about the places I wanted to travel, about the dreams I'd given up on. At one point, I caught him watching me with this softness in his eyes, and my breath caught in my throat. "What?" I asked, self-conscious. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Just, I can't believe he doesn't see you. Not the way I do." "No. No." The words sank into me like poison and honey all at once. On the drive back, neither of us spoke much. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, heavy, electric. When we pulled into the neighborhood, I almost expected him to say goodbye, to let me escape back into my house and pretend nothing had happened. But he didn't. Instead, he followed me inside, carrying the leftover box of fries like an excuse. We set it on the counter, and before I could even think about what was happening, he reached out and touched my hand. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "But if you feel what I feel, just tell me to stop, and I will." I should have told him to stop. I should have pulled away. I should have thought about vows, about consequences, about the life I'd built. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, trembling, as if we were both afraid the world might shatter around us. But when his hand cupped my face, when I melted into him, it became something else entirely. Something raw, desperate, hungry. All the years of pretending, all the stolen glances, all the quiet conversations spilled into that moment. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathless, dizzy. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand covering my mouth. Daniel's forehead rested against mine, his voice low and steady. "I've wanted to do that for so long." Reality came crashing back, fast and brutal. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. "We can't. Daniel, we can't. I'm married. This was a mistake." His eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. He just nodded, stepping back, giving me space. "If that's what you want." But the way my body ached, the way my lips still tingled from his kiss, I knew it wasn't what I wanted. Not entirely. That night, Mark called from his hotel room. His voice was cheerful, casual. "The guys want to play another round tomorrow, so I'll be home late Sunday. Don't wait up. Deuce." I stared at the phone, listening to the man who was supposed to be my partner, my love, my everything. And all I felt was emptiness. When I hung up, I sat on the couch in the dark, replaying the kiss over and over. My heart was torn between guilt and longing, between the life I had and the life I secretly wanted. And in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. I wish I could tell you that I stopped after that kiss, that I went back to my marriage, confessed to Mark, and worked on rebuilding what had been broken. But the truth is, once a line like that is crossed, it changes everything. I spent the next few days in a haze. Every time I looked at Mark, I felt like a stranger in my own home. His routine, his detachment, his distracted affection. It all felt like a life I was watching from the outside. And every time I caught sight of Daniel, every time I remembered the warmth of his lips, I felt alive in a way that terrified me. The pull between them, between obligation and desire, was tearing me apart. It didn't take long for things to spiral. A week after the kiss, Mark came home early from work. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when he walked in looking oddly serious. "We need to talk," he said. My stomach dropped. For a moment I thought maybe he knew. Maybe my guilt had been painted all over my face and he'd pieced it together. "What's wrong?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I feel like we've been off for a while now. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but are you happy?" The question hit me harder than if he'd accused me outright, because the truth was written all over my silence. No, I wasn't happy. I hadn't been for years. But instead of admitting that, I did what I always did. I deflected. "Of course I'm happy. Just stressed with work, that's all." "Myung?" Mark studied me for a moment, his eyes tired, skeptical. Then he nodded slowly, accepting the lie. That night, he rolled over in bed and tried to initiate intimacy for the first time in months. I let him kiss me, but every nerve in my body screamed at the comparison. His kiss felt mechanical, absent, nothing like the fire Daniel had ignited in me. I pulled away, muttering about being tired, and I saw the disappointment flicker in his face before he turned off the lamp. That was the moment I knew. Our marriage wasn't just strained. It was dying. Things with Daniel escalated quietly, dangerously. It wasn't a full-blown affair, at least, not yet. But it was emotional, undeniable. Late-night porch talks turned into lingering touches. Errands by chance at the same time turned into coffee dates. One evening, when Mark worked late, Daniel came over to fix a leaky faucet. When he finished, we ended up sitting at the kitchen table, talking for hours. And then he reached across, took my hand, and didn't let go. "This doesn't have to be complicated," he whispered. You don't have to stay in something that makes you unhappy. Tears burned my eyes. Because as much as I wanted to believe him, it was complicated. Divorce wasn't just a word, it was a wrecking ball. A dismantling of vows, finances, families, identities. And despite everything, a part of me still clung to the life I'd built with Mark. But when Daniel looked at me like that, like I was the only person in the world, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Mark and I had another fight, this time about money, about how I checked out of the marriage. His words were sharp, frustrated. It's like you're here, but you're not here. What the hell happened to us? Nanan. I wanted to scream the truth. What happened to us is that I feel invisible. What happened to us is Daniel. What happened is that I'm not in love with you anymore. But instead, I stayed quiet. My silence said everything anyway. Later that night, I walked out onto the porch, tears streaming down my face. And as if the universe itself was conspiring, Daniel was there, leaning against his fence, watching me with that look of concern that had become so familiar. Without thinking, I walked over. He opened the gate between our yards, and suddenly I was in his arms, sobbing into his chest. I can't do this anymore, I whispered. His arms tightened around me. Then don't. We kissed again, harder this time, desperate and messy. It wasn't planned. It wasn't restrained. It was everything we'd been holding back, crashing through the walls we'd built. And in that moment, I made a choice, whether I admitted it out loud or not. The fallout wasn't immediate. Mark didn't catch us. The neighborhood didn't whisper. On the surface, life carried on. But inside, I was a different person. Every dinner with Mark felt like betrayal. Every laugh with Daniel felt like salvation. I knew it couldn't last. Secrets like this don't stay buried forever. So here I am, writing this, torn between two versions of myself. The loyal wife who keeps her vows, even if it means living half alive. Or the woman who takes the terrifying leap towards something real with the man next door. I don't know yet which path I'll take. I just know that either way, something in me has already changed forever. Because once you've tasted what it's like to be truly seen, truly wanted, there's no going back to invisibility.